Okay, let's go ahead and get started then. The title of my talk is You Type Too Much. Let's spend more time doing than typing. Start out a little bit about me. I'm a little bit of a Doctor Who fan, if you can't tell on that, but my name is Brandon, and I'm an infrastructure automation engineer over at Sony PlayStation Network on the Badass team. And that stands for Build and Deployment Automation Support System. So yes, I can legitimately say on my resume, I am a badass developer. If you want to find me on any social network, there you go on there. I can't say I'm on PSN very often, ironically. I probably need to fix that. If you want to check out my GitHub, there actually will be quite a bit of information about this talk on there, as well as extra resources. So if you want to go to that link, you can have all the examples I'm working on, all the snippets, all the macros, everything, as well as a nice long resource page of extra links and things that I'm going to be working off of. That would be over here. So we have all of our notes, links to slides, links to everything I've mentioned, as well as other suggested resources, tutorials, or other things. I have tried to mark if something is actually going to cost you money on there, so should help out a bit. Okay, what are we going to cover today? First thing we're going to look into is learning your operating system and learning your shell, what I think would be the most generic, which is going to apply pretty much across the board. And then we're going to get into learning your editor, which is a little bit narrower scope of learning how to use any type of editor shortcuts, snippets, macros, or what have you. And last, which is very, very narrow focus, is learning how to generate code. So let's go ahead and jump in then. Now, as I'm a Mac developer, I have a few tools that are unique to Mac that I find very, very useful. The first one of those would be Alfred, which is launched with Alt space on the Mac. And this does have paid features, I will warn you. So you can do very generic things like, say, a calculation if you want to. Define a word. Check out HTML5DevConf, bring it up in a new window. And the part that's going to cost are workflows, which are very, very useful features. So you can say something such as, I can never remember what in the world a Python Lambda looks like. So I could say SO for Stack Overflow, Python Lambda. That's going to take a second to generate. And there we go. We have a Stack Overflow question we can look at, and we have instantly right there. Now, Alfred is also nice in that it allows integration with GitHub for issues, commits, or anything else. It also allows Jira integration and various other tools. Basically, if you can imagine it, there's probably a workflow that's going to cover your use case on that. The next tool, which is a little bit of a tie-in, is Dash, which is an offline documentation tool. The handy thing about this is that you can also download, say, Ruby gems, Node packages, or otherwise for offline documentation. Say you don't want to remember your CSS or anything else. So that actually has an Alfred workflow as well. So I could say something such as Ruby enumerable. And we have all the methods up there. I could just go to, say, any, and there we go. I have right there the documentation for any. I could go to JavaScript, look for slice, and I have that pop up in the background as well, which is very handy if you want to get through some documentation without having to open up Google or look through a bunch of search pages for that. Now, Dash also has editor integration, so if we go over to the Dash doc examples, let's say I don't know what low dash merge is, for instance. I can press Control H on there, and that will open that up in the documentation as well. Now on to some shell features. The first thing I would recommend is these two books are absolutely amazing if you want a good grasp on the Unix shell, just overall in general. Unix Power Tools and the Linux command line, both of which are going to go over a lot in history, aliasing, details, and pretty much anything else you could want at a much deeper level than I'm going to go over today. If you feel you don't know Unix, I would very highly suggest looking into those. Now, the first thing you can do in shell is vim mode bindings. If you've ever noticed that you happen to have some very long command, set that real quick. We can say something like, I can hop into vim mode, and you'll notice up there in the top right, it started with 3 red arrows letting me know that I'm now in normal mode. So what I can do is I can go back a few words, go forward 2 words, all with vim bindings. I can delete to the end of the word or anything else, honestly. I can hop back in insertion mode. And one of the nice things about Mac is you don't have to use vim mode for this, but if you hit the option key, you'll notice that my cursor is changing to a crosshair there. So what I can do is I can click on any area in the entire command, and there you go. The next thing is what's called the Silver Searcher. It's faster than grep and awk. And one of the nicer things is it respects your git ignore or your HG ignore or whatever else have you. So say you have a bunch of node modules and you'd rather not those show up in your search results whenever you're looking for some relevant code. So you could say something like, I want to search in JavaScript for a function with an argument of error somewhere. So I can just pop that in there. Use that Alt shortcut because I can't copy that right. And now we know that AG examples has a function called error in there with, well, argument of error. I could find that there's a function with BC for arguments, and very nice. You can even get colored output of that, so you can tell very quickly. You can control the amount of lines you get back for feedback. You can also list the files where this is found if you want to pipe that to Vim or something else, for instance. Next, we have history. I would say this is probably one of the most critical areas of Unix to really get a feel of. This will save you a ton of time. Like, let's say, for instance, you forgot to put sudo on, let's say, an ls command or something that's just not going to work with that. What you can do is you can use sudo bang bang, and now you have sudo ls, so you don't have to type in that entire command again. You're ready to go right there. The next one is bang $, which would be the last command. Or let's say bang SSH, because you can't remember what in the world that last SSH command was, and you don't particularly want to scroll back through 50, 60 history areas to find it. So it looks like I was secure shelling into my router there. Go back into Vim mode, delete that. Another one is you can actually control the arguments that you get on there. You can say bang bang colon 3 to 4, for instance. So let's say we do something like, it would help if I'm in insertion mode. Echo 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I want to get a hold of the 3rd and 4th argument from there. So I have 3 and 4 right there. Another nifty one is if you happen to make a typo and you know you've made a typo, you can actually do an inline substitution of every word matching that pattern. So say that I did something like get stouts. I think that's how you pronounce that. All you need to do is do a replace stouts with status, and you're good to go right there. Now, while that's nice, that seems like a little bit of extra typing. So what you can do instead is a command that I'm not going to say the actual name of, but you can look it up on that GitHub repository. I've aliased it to oops, and that will be on the GitHub link, probably because I don't exactly want to go dropping F-bombs in the middle of a conference presentation. That'd probably be slightly off, wouldn't it? So what I can do is say something like get status, or get stouts again. Oops. And there you go, get status. That can also correct things such as you forgot sudo and you don't want to remember bang bang. You can just say oops if you've aliased it to that. Or say that you forgot to type a command right, or say that there's something at the very end of the file where it says do this as well, or say there's much of anything. You can even make templates for this afterwards to correct other commands. It'll take care of it for you. Now the next one would be aliasing and functions. The nice thing about aliases is you can take a really long command and alias it down to a few letters, such as I'd alias G to get, for instance. The nice thing in Z shell is you can actually do a global alias to where you have something that can be put at any point of the command line. So I can say log, for instance, and say I do something. What T does is it takes the output of one command, pipes it out to something else, and continues on as if nothing happens, kind of like a tap in Ruby, for instance. So what I can do is I can say something like ls, and I want to log that. It's going to still tell me that, but I can also look at log.txt, which has a few examples of me playing with that. And there you go, it's in a log file for you. Now, functions are very handy in that you can repeat various things, and like for instance, I don't want to remember get rev parse abbrev head. I mean, I can't even say it right. So say you do that, all you have to do is branch name. And there's that. Say that you have something to where you want to prefix all your commits with your branch prefix. You can make another function and have that prefix in there. So all you had to do is something like branch prefix in there. And you're done with that as well. Or say that you have a commonality of you want to make a directory and cd into it, you can do that as well. Now, this one tends to make me a lot more honest. It's a most used command, and I don't pretend to know exactly what that awk statement does. I should probably look into that later. So you can see that I've used clear a bunch, which is a really bad idea on a Mac because you actually have the ability to use Control-L, which will also clear it and not pollute your entire history file with 1,300 clears. Wow, I'm almost lead on that. Now, there are dangers of aliasing, and I've done this before to myself by accident. I had a tool called Launchy that I was using in Ruby, and I decided, let's alias that to ln, just because that's shorter. Well, I've come to find out later whenever I'm trying to symbolically link some profiles and other things that I've aliased over this. So I'm trying to figure out, scratching my head, why in the world is Chrome opening whenever I'm trying to do a symbolic link? So unalias is your best friend in this case. You can just drop an alias right there and not have to bother with it. And then you can use AG to find and kill that thing later and get rid of it. Now, the next thing we're going to go over are editors. Personally, I'm kind of in between Vim and Sublime. I tend to use Sublime more because it's a lot less likely to incite physical violence or religious warfare, I've found, especially in pair programming. I mean, if you go to the person next to you and say, I use Vim or I use Emacs, you're probably going to get at least some type of weird look off of that. Of course, you can make the argument, but real programmers tend to use this or that or anything else. Honestly, it doesn't matter. Most of the feature sets are going to be the same no matter what you do, except in rare circumstances. And while Emacs does have a butterfly plugin, I'm sure, I would not be surprised if Tim Pope has already made something for Vim as well. Okay, so let's go over some built-in shortcuts for Sublime. This is in Sublime Examples. So the first one is if we press Command-Shift-Space, We can select the entirety of what's inside the brackets, backspace that, maybe write something new. Now, most of the time, whenever you see Sublime, you're going to know that you can press Alt and use the vertical cursor there. Well, you could also use Control Shift and up or down to get more control points on that, which saves you from having to use your mouse. Let's say that you have a badly named function that you want to find and replace. You can use Command D to do that. Now, do note it's very case insensitive, which might make issues for you later. But let's say that you're sitting there pressing Command D repeatedly, wondering how many of these are there in the entire file, and you think this is a pointless waste of time. Well, that's why you have Control Command G, which selects all instances but at once. Now let's say that we copy this function and we want it inside the other function. If we paste it normally, you're going to notice the indentation is wrong. You'd have to go and fix that. What you can do instead is by just adding Shift, so Command Shift V. It'll respect the indentation and save you quite a bit of time with screwing with indentation afterwards. Next, we're going to go over snippets. So to make a snippet, what you would do is you would go to New Snippet, but we already have a few in here. Like, let's say that you're using Jasmine for testing. It kind of gets old writing out describe over and over again, or it, or expect, or anything else. So what you can do is you can make a snippet to take care of that. So what that's doing is that's saying, I want this, and then I want to interpolate as a tab stop. The first one, which is description, is the default text, and the second one, which is a comment that says body, which is another tab stop. So if we go back to Sublime examples and start typing in describe here, you have the description there, so we can say something fun, for instance. You can put an it in there. And there you go. You don't even have to bother to write out all that. Now, I will say that the one weakness that Sublime does have is that its macro system is very weak and that it does not allow find and replace. And this is one thing where I would seriously recommend Vim instead, as you can execute commands, sed, anything. So in Vim, we can actually do something. And this is Control P if you haven't seen it before, where we can record a macro. So to record a macro, what we do is press QQ to make a new macro that's stored in the Q buffer. And what this is doing is it's recording the keystrokes. So I'm going to use beginning of line, insert, function, go to end of line, use A for after, make a semicolon there, go back, press Q to stop, and I can replay that as many times as I want. So let's say that I use @Q, and now we have that function wrapped as well. What's nice about these is that you can bind them to keys commands and various other things. You can also use editor commands, or you could use system commands. So say that you have a Ruby script in your home directory that you want to use to pre-format your text, you can just use this, and that's one of the features that makes Vim so beautiful, I'd say. Now, if you haven't heard of Tim Pope, buy this guy a beer if you ever see him, because he's made some of the most amazing plugins you'll ever see if you're using Vim. As far as Rails, Git integration, even the package manager, if you haven't heard this name, I would definitely check it out, see some of his plugins and some of the work he's done, and it'll save you a substantial amount of time in typing. The next one we're going to go over is Emmet, which is HTML generation. Let's go to Emmet examples there. So say we have something such as nav.mainNav UL with an LI that happens to have an A inside it, and we want 5 of those. We can just type that out, press tab at the end of the line, and bang, there we go. Now, Emmet also comes with some nifty shortcuts that you might not have seen before as well, such as Command-Shift-K. You can select the opening tag. Like, let's say that I don't exactly like this in A. I can just say, I want it to be a button instead. I could press escape to get back there, and then I could change that to, say, class for a bootstrap or anything else and be done with it. Now I can use Control D to select around the container to get, say, the A there, the LI, and up to the UL for HTML. This one is more of an actual built-in, but you can use Command Control up or down to move those up or down. And say that we want to wrap this in a button tag or an image tag or something like that. What we can do is we can use Control-Shift-W. Does help if I actually have that highlighted. To wrap that as well. And what's nice is it respects that the ending cursor is not going to be there anymore, so you can just do that right offhand. And then say that you don't exactly want that anchor tag there. All you have to do is Command tick. That's gone. The LI is gone. The UL is gone. And it even de-indents for you. Now, one thing I didn't actually know about it is you can apparently do mathematical operations in there. So say that you don't want to fudge around with pixels or EMs or percentages or anything else like that. All you do is use Command-Shift-Y, and that evaluates that right there, which I did not think was going to be handy, but has saved me quite a bit of time in the past. Now, the next thing, and I know everyone's probably going to groan at this, are style plugins. Pretty much cut the entire argument off at its head. Just have something in the editor that's going to tell you you're missing a semicolon, you're missing a var, you're missing something, anything, for instance, and just defeat that before you even have to go to code review and spend 20 comments arguing about it. So if you notice, you'll see that whenever I have something that's not correct there, it's going to give me a warning sign, and it's actually going to tell me in the bottom what's wrong with that. Okay, the last thing we have on here is learning to generate code. If you haven't ever played with yeoman, it is extremely useful as well. Whereas you have Rails generators that generate code, yeoman, I would say, is a lot more flexible in that regard for scaffolding things quickly. You can make something such as Angular Bootstrap, so you can have a functioning Angular Bootstrap ready to go. Have all your dependencies loaded, node modules, what have you. You can even select exactly what you want in there as well. But say, for instance, that this isn't quite enough for you and you need just a little bit more power, but you like what Angular Bootstrap is doing, so you want to use a little bit of it. What you can actually do is compose these into new generators. So you can use a generator with a generator to make a generator. A little bit meta. But using this, you can actually build out your own framework saying, I want to use Angular Bootstrap, but I also want to generate a React component or something like that, or for whatever reason, I want Ember in there as well, God help you. And you can do that. Now, one of the nifty things I've found recently are API docs. What these allow you to do are like API Blueprint, RAML, and Swagger. Is they let you make an API specification defining exactly what your API is going to behave like and actually generate code from that. Some of them, such as Swagger, actually allow you to generate both the client and the server on there. So if you see in here, we have a Swagger editor in line. So we can define the version of our API. We can define the endpoints as well as any of the parameters it takes, formats, numbers, everything else. And what we can do is we can say something like generate server. Let's say I want a Node.js server, so I can download that right there. Or say that I want a client, I can generate, let's say, TypeScript is a little bit lower than this, so TypeScript Node, for instance, or TypeScript Angular, and you have your Angular client as well, so you don't even have to bother with writing that. I will say there is some work being done in the RAML area as well in using API to generate Rails documentation inline and generate that to RAML so you can automatically make AngularJS clients or Ember clients right from that. Now, there are dangers of automation, and you really do have to be careful with some of this. The first thing is you really need to make sure you're generating the right thing, because there have been times whenever I thought I'm going to automate this, but I never actually wrote the base code that this was going to be based on. So I didn't know whether or not it was going to work, and I come to find out there's a complete disconnect. These things don't work together. I have to rewrite the entire thing, and it's a whole mess I'm probably just going to have to implode and be done with. The next thing is you really need to ask, is it necessary that I automate this? I mean, for instance, is it really necessary to have an entire arbitrary system to pass condiments? And the last thing is do not automate what could be extracted in the first place. If you notice that you would have abstracted some code and it needs a lot of drying out, you should probably look into drying it out before you decide to automate or abstract that even more and build upon it, because otherwise you're going to have a lot of a mess to contend with later whenever you decide, I'm going to clean this out and I'm going to make it behave better. So finishing up a little bit fast, we have the GitHub repository back there, and that has all of the snippets, macros, even the Swagger generated, as well as any of the examples and resources on here. That also contains links to the slides if you'd like those as well. And that's about all I have. Do we have any questions? Okay, then, that's about it. Have a good night, folks.